You need to understand that empathy is not just a trait. It is a way of existing in the world, a way of feeling every subtle vibration in another person's heart, a way of absorbing not only their joy but their pain as if it were your own. And this is what makes the connection between an empath and an avoidant so beautiful yet so fragile, because while you, as an empath, give fully, openly, with your entire being, the avoidant moves in shadows. They love in whispers, and they hide behind walls that feel unscalable. Walls built not from malice, but from fear, from the knowledge that intimacy is dangerous, that closeness can suffocate them, that vulnerability can break them in ways they are not prepared to handle. And the tension between these two ways of loving creates a world where hearts collide, where longing stretches into frustration, and where silence often becomes louder than words. You need to understand that when you pour your heart into someone, when you feel them in every gesture, when you anticipate their moods, when you see the unspoken and respond with tenderness, it is because your heart does not know how to separate them from yourself, because to love is to give, and to give is to exist fully, and you do not hold back. You do not ration your warmth, and that is what makes your love so remarkable, but it is also what makes it so threatening to the avoidant, because they are not used to that kind of constancy, that kind of openness, that kind of surrender. And when they sense it, part of them wants to run. Part of them wants to retreat into safety, into distance, into the parts of themselves that do not have to risk exposure, that do not have to acknowledge that their own heart, too, is capable of depth and need. And it is that very depth that terrifies them, even as it draws them in, even as it makes them feel alive, even as it reminds them that love is something they cannot control. You need to understand that the empath feels every hesitation, every pause, every retreat. And it is like watching someone you love dissolve in slow motion, and your heart aches, not out of judgment, not out of disappointment, but out of recognition, because you see the love that is there, hiding behind armor, and you wish you could reach through it. You wish you could touch it. You wish they could hear the words that are not being spoken, the confession that trembles on the edge of their lips, the quiet desire to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved fully without fear. But they cannot yet say it. They cannot yet act on it. And in the meantime, your heart waits and your soul stretches, and your patience is tested in ways you never thought possible, because you know that love is not always visible, and you know that silence does not always mean absence. Yet the weight of absence presses down on your chest, and you feel it as if it were your own. You need to understand that this dynamic is not a game. It is not manipulation. It is not cruelty. It is simply the clash of two ways of being in the world, and both are authentic, both are real, both are valid. Yet the empath often carries the heavier burden, because you feel not only your own longing but theirs, and you hope that your love, your understanding, your patience, your gentle insistence on presence can reach through the distance and the fear and bring them closer to themselves, closer to you, closer to a place where love does not require a shield, a barrier, a retreat, but it is safe, it is warm, it is steady, and it is mutual. And every time they pull away, every time they retreat, your heart aches. And every time they come near, every time they offer a fragment of their truth, a flicker of connection, a moment of presence, your heart soars, because you recognize that love is not always consistent, but it is still love, and you honor it, you respect it, you hold it, you allow it to exist even in its incomplete, imperfect form, because that is what it means to love as an empath, and it is both your greatest strength and your greatest vulnerability. You need to understand that empathy and love is not about fixing. It is not about forcing. It is not about persuading someone to meet you where you are. It is about witnessing. It is about presence. It is about honoring what is there without trying to erase what is missing. And that is why loving an avoidant is both the most beautiful and the most heartbreaking experience you will ever know. Because you see them fully, you see the potential, you see the love that exists even when unspoken, and you hope, not out of naivety, but out of faith, that one day they will trust enough to step forward, to expose their heart, to meet you in the place where vulnerability is not terrifying, but liberating, where closeness is not danger, but intimacy, where love is not something to be feared, but celebrated. And until that moment, you wait, you observe, you protect your own heart while loving them fiercely, tenderly, wholly, in ways that they may never be able to express but will feel, whether consciously or unconsciously, because an empath's love is never hidden, even when the avoidant cannot admit it, even when the words are absent, even when the actions are inconsistent, even when the heart seems distant. The love is there, and it touches them, it shapes them, it lingers, it leaves traces on their soul that they will carry even if they never say thank you, even if they never acknowledge it, even if they never understand the depth of what you feel. You need to understand that this is not a call to endure neglect. This is not an excuse for imbalance. This is not permission to let your needs go unmet, but it is an invitation to recognize the profound difference between someone who cannot admit their love and someone who does not love at all. And that recognition, when held with compassion, does not make your heart smaller. It does not make your patience weak. It does not make your effort foolish. It makes your love wiser, deeper, more nuanced, more human, because you see the layers, you feel the complexity, you honor the struggle, you embrace the paradox, and you hold the love without demanding it be returned exactly as you hope. Because true empathy is about loving fully even in the shadow of silence, even in the presence of avoidance, even in the unacknowledged spaces. Because that is where the human heart lives, where connection is fragile, where understanding is profound, and where the quiet courage of loving without guarantee becomes the most transformative, most intimate, most authentic experience of all. You need to understand that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the courage to reveal the parts of yourself that are raw, unguarded, tender, and sometimes terrifying. And for an avoidant, that courage is a mountain that feels impossible to climb, because to admit love is to risk exposure, to admit attachment is to risk rejection, and to admit need is to risk shame. And yet beneath all their distance, beneath all the walls, beneath all the careful retreats and the protective silence, there is a heart that beats, that feels, that longs, that wants connection, but fears it with every fiber of its being. And this fear is not always logical. It is primal. It is visceral. It is born from experiences, from patterns, from the inner voice that whispers that closeness may lead to loss, that tenderness may lead to pain, that showing love may lead to being hurt in ways they cannot control. And so they pull back, they detach, they retreat into the parts of themselves that feel safe, and they do this not because they are incapable of love, but because loving fully without armor feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no net. You need to understand that when someone who fears vulnerability meets an empath, it is both beautiful and chaotic, because the empath opens their heart wide, and the avoidant is drawn to that light, that warmth, that sincerity, yet simultaneously terrified of it, because being seen fully means there is nowhere left to hide, and hiding has always been their defense, their survival mechanism, their way of navigating the world without getting hurt, and love when it asks for full presence, when it asks for honesty, when it asks for emotional surrender, feels dangerous, feels like the possibility of being overwhelmed, and the avoidant freezes, retreats, or deflects. Not because they do not feel, not because they do not care, but because fear grips them so tightly that even the deepest affection can feel like a threat. You need to understand that fear of vulnerability is not about a lack of desire, it is about the weight of risk, the terror of being exposed, the anxiety that if they open their heart, they may lose themselves or be consumed by the intensity of love that an empath naturally offers. And it is a paradox because they crave closeness. They long for connection. They want to be known. And yet the very act of seeking it puts them in a state of panic, because the closer they come, the more vulnerable they feel. And the more vulnerable they feel, the more their instincts push them back. And what emerges for the empath is confusion, hurt, longing, because the person they love seems distant, detached, contradictory, inconsistent, yet everything you see in their distance is not lack of feeling but fear, not absence but hesitation, not coldness but protection. And your heart, as an empath, wants to reach them, wants to soothe them, wants to show them that love can be safe. But it is a delicate balance, a dance that requires patience, understanding, and unwavering respect for their internal struggle. You need to understand that fear of vulnerability is a battle waged in silence, fought in moments that no one sees, in the hesitation before a word is spoken, in the pause before a text is sent, in the internal negotiation between desire and self-preservation. And the empath often feels the brunt of this struggle, sensing both the love and the fear, witnessing the hesitation and the longing, and it can feel like walking a tightrope, because one wrong move, one sudden push, one demand for expression can trigger retreat. And yet the empath also learns that love is not always about declarations. It is sometimes about witnessing, about staying present without pushing, about holding space without expecting immediate reciprocation. And that is where the depth of empathy is revealed, in the patience to see someone through their fear without losing your own heart, without dimming your light, without shrinking your needs. And it is here in this space that real love is forged, quiet, strong, and profound, because it requires courage on both sides. Courage to feel, courage to wait, courage to love without guarantee, courage to honor both the fear and the desire. You need to understand that for an avoidant, admitting love is a vulnerability they are not yet ready to face. And when you, as an empath, demand certainty, clarity, or words they cannot give, you unintentionally trigger their fear, and their withdrawal is not rejection, it is defense, a way to protect themselves from the intensity they are not prepared to navigate. And if you can hold your heart steady through their retreat, if you can maintain compassion without sacrificing your own needs, if you can witness the fear without becoming consumed by it, you create a space where healing and trust can emerge, where their walls may soften, where love may eventually be admitted, not because it was demanded, but because it became safe to feel it fully, because they saw that your empathy could bear their fear without judgment, because they realized that love does not always have to be a threat, that closeness can coexist with safety, that intimacy does not have to be annihilation, and that vulnerability can be survived. You need to understand that fear of vulnerability does not make the avoidant unloving. It makes them human, it makes them cautious, it makes them aware of the fragility of emotion. And your role as an empath is not to fix, not to chase, not to coerce, but to understand, to witness, to honor, to love, fully without demanding reciprocation in the form or timing they cannot yet provide. And that is both the challenge and the gift of this connection. Because in learning to navigate their fear, in learning to honor their hesitations while maintaining your own integrity, you become stronger, wiser, more compassionate, and your love transcends need and enters the realm of true understanding, where patience is not resignation, where hope is not attachment, where connection is not possession, and where both hearts, even in struggle, can grow without losing themselves. You need to understand that loving someone who fears vulnerability is not about waiting endlessly for words you may never hear. It is about seeing love where it exists, even if it is unspoken, even if it is tentative, even if it is incomplete, and it is about loving courageously, without compromise, without shrinking, without letting fear dictate your heart, because your empathy is not a weakness. It is a power. It is a beacon. It is the kind of love that does not need constant affirmation to be real. And even when the avoidant cannot admit what they feel, your presence, your understanding, your steady heart communicates love more profoundly than any declaration could, because love, at its deepest, is not about words. It is about being, and your being witnesses their fear, their struggle, their heart, and honors it with the kind of patience, grace, and unwavering compassion that only a true empath can offer. And that is the beauty, the tragedy, and the triumph of this connection. You need to understand that everyone longs to be seen, truly seen, in their deepest, most authentic self. And for an avoidant, this need for validation and understanding exists quietly, hidden beneath layers of self-protection, beneath a careful exterior, beneath the armor they wear to survive the world. And it is not always obvious because they are masters of concealment, masters of appearing indifferent, masters of controlling their presence so that their vulnerabilities do not expose them to risk. And yet, despite all their defenses, there is a part of them that desperately wants acknowledgement, a part that aches for someone to notice not just the surface, but the intricate layers of fear and longing, the contradictions between their distance and their desire, the moments when they withdraw and the moments when they hope. And this part of them, the tender, quiet part, waits in the shadows, hoping that someone, somewhere, will recognize it without demanding it, will validate it without judgment, will understand it without frustration. And that is the paradox of loving someone avoidant. The closer they are to you, the more they need validation, yet the more they fear asking for it. You need to understand that validation for an avoidant is not about constant reassurance. It is not about daily declarations of love. It is not about empty phrases that sound good but hold no weight. It is about genuine acknowledgement of their struggles, their fears, their patterns, and their moments of effort. It is about seeing the courage it takes for them to show up despite the fear that grips them. And it is about honoring their progress without forcing them to admit what they are not ready to say aloud, because asking too much too soon, demanding too much too quickly can trigger withdrawal, can trigger defensiveness, can trigger the very distance that they use to protect themselves. And so validation must be subtle, compassionate, and consistent. It must communicate understanding without pressure. It must say, I see you, I notice you, I honor you, in ways that allow them to soften without feeling exposed. And that requires patience, emotional intelligence, and unwavering empathy. You need to understand that the avoidant struggle to admit love is not a reflection of their feelings, but a reflection of their fear of inadequacy, fear of losing control, fear of being misunderstood, and fear of being hurt. And validation provides a lifeline, not a crutch, because it shows them that their effort, their presence, their attempts to connect, even when imperfect, are recognized, appreciated, and enough. And when they feel validated, their walls can slowly soften, their voice can find courage, their heart can take small steps toward intimacy. And yet, validation is not about solving their fear. It is not about convincing them to change overnight. It is not about pushing them into vulnerability before they are ready. It is about holding steady, providing consistency, offering empathy, and allowing them to feel that their emotions are legitimate, their struggles are seen, and their love is welcome, even when they cannot yet articulate it fully. You need to understand that when you withhold understanding, when you dismiss their hesitation, when you interpret their withdrawal as lack of feeling, you inadvertently reinforce their fear, you trigger shame, you confirm the inner narrative that says they are unworthy of love, and you unintentionally push them further into isolation, because the avoidant often measures the world by safety, and when love feels unsafe, even if it is abundant, they will retreat. And so your recognition, your validation, your patience becomes a lifeline that signals that love can be safe, that intimacy can exist without annihilation, that vulnerability can be met with care rather than judgment, that connection can exist without erasure of the self. And that is the gift you offer when you hold space for them without demanding immediate surrender, without expecting clarity that they are not yet ready to give, without pushing them to perform love the way the world says it should look. You need to understand that validation is also about reflecting their humanity back to them, not only their actions, but their emotions, their fears, their contradictions, their complexities, because avoidants often feel fragmented, split between the desire for closeness and the instinct to flee. And when someone acknowledges both sides without judgment, without critique, without impatience, it creates a bridge between the heart that hides and the heart that longs. It creates a space where trust can grow. It creates the possibility for love to be expressed in ways that do not feel threatening, and it demonstrates that intimacy is not a trap, that love is not a cage, and that connection can exist without annihilating their sense of self. You need to understand that validation and understanding do not mean tolerating patterns that hurt you, do not mean excusing behavior that causes harm, and do not mean losing your boundaries, because true empathy respects both your heart and theirs. It honors your needs as much as it honors theirs. It communicates care without sacrificing self-respect, and it creates a model for healthy connection, showing the avoidant that closeness does not require abandoning oneself, that love can be patient without being permissive, that affection can be consistent without being conditional, and that acknowledgement can be transformative, offering a mirror of their efforts and their emotions that they often cannot see themselves. You need to understand that this process is not quick, it is not easy, it is not linear, because fear does not disappear overnight, because walls do not crumble instantly, because trust takes time to grow, and because the avoidant is often navigating patterns that were built over years, even decades of survival. But your steady presence, your consistent recognition, your compassionate patience, your unwavering empathy can become the soil in which their heart begins to soften, in which their courage begins to grow, in which their love begins to emerge not as a response to demand, but as a natural, authentic unfolding of their true feelings. And when that happens, the connection becomes profound, resilient, and enduring because it is rooted in understanding rather than obligation, in acknowledgement rather than pressure, and in validation rather than assumption. You need to understand that your role as an empath in this relationship is sacred, because you provide the kind of recognition that can awaken their heart without breaking them, you provide the kind of understanding that allows them to navigate love without fear, and you provide the kind of patience that allows growth without forcing it. And when you hold this space, when you meet their fear with empathy, when you meet their hesitation with acknowledgement, when you meet their heart with respect, you create a connection that is not only possible, it is transformative because it teaches them, slowly, gently, that love can be safe, that closeness can be kind, that vulnerability can be welcomed, and that their feelings, even the ones they cannot yet express, are valid, important, and worthy of care. And in that truth, in that acknowledgement, in that presence, love becomes not a gamble, not a risk, not a trap, but a sanctuary. And that is the profound power of validation and understanding.